The booth in the corner had been empty for 3 mornings. Patty Olson noticed it on the second day when she was pouring decaf for Merle Hutchins and automatically reached for the 4th cup before catching herself. She set the pot down without filling it. Merle didn't say anything, neither did she. By the 3rd morning, she noticed it first thing, before she'd even turned the sign in the window from closed to open. The booth in the corner had a ring on the laminate from years of coffee cups, exactly where he set his mug. The vinyl on the seat had a small pale streak, where the zipper of his jacket had rubbed it. Same spot, same side, every day for 11 months. Patty stood looking at it for a long moment, then went to start the coffee. She told herself he had probably moved on. She didn't believe it. If you've ever held your breath waiting for someone to walk through a door, and the door keeps not opening, stay with the story. And if this is your first time here, we'd be glad to have you subscribe and turn on the bell so you don't miss what comes next. The man's name was Garrison Holt. He had turned 42 the previous November, and he had not celebrated it, because celebrating things alone in a rented room had started to feel worse than ignoring them entirely. He was 6'2", broad through the shoulders, with the kind of build that came not from a gym, but from years of carrying weight across difficult ground. His hair was dark brown, going silver at the temples, cut short in the habit that had never left him after 16 years in the Marine Corps. His face was angular and sun-weathered, with a pale scar that ran along his right cheekbone from a training incident in his 4th year, and deep-set brown eyes that moved when he entered a room the way a person's eyes move when they are used to rooms being dangerous. He had come to Callum Ridge, Montana in the previous January, passing through on his way to somewhere he hadn't decided on yet. He had not found a reason to leave. The reason had 4 legs and was named Decker. Decker was a German shepherd, 7 years old, with a sable coat, dark along the spine from neck to tail, warming to a deep amber gold along his flanks and legs, with a black muzzle and black-tipped ears that stood fully erect at all times. He weighed 82 pounds, most of it muscle, and he moved with a smooth, deliberate economy that came from working dog training so deep it had become instinct. He wore a plain olive-drab collar, no vest, no patches, nothing to announce what he had once been. A small notch in the top edge of his right ear, the souvenir of an unrelated misadventure in a chain-link fence in eastern Iraq, was the only mark on him that broke the working symmetry of his build. Garrison had been given Decker at the end of his last deployment, when the dog's official handler was medically discharged and couldn't take him. The paperwork had gone through a veterans K-9 program in Billings. Garrison had driven 6 hours to pick him up and hadn't thought too hard about why. He had thought about it later on the drive back, Decker riding in the back seat with his head up and his ears forward, scanning the prairie through the windows the way he had scanned streets in Fallujah. He supposed he had needed something that understood silence the same way he did. For 11 months, Garrison and Decker had shared a rented room at the Sunrise Motor Lodge on the east side of Callum Ridge. The room had a bed, a small table, a window that looked out on the parking lot, and a space heater that smelled faintly of scorched dust when it ran. They had eaten most of their dinners at the diner on Main Street, the one Patty Olson had run for 17 years, where the coffee was always ready and the booths were always warm and nobody asked Garrison questions he didn't want to answer. That arrangement had suited him. Decker woke before dawn on the Wednesday morning, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that he did not lie back down. Garrison heard him moving, heard his nails on the linoleum, heard him stop at the side of the bed nearest the door. He came awake the way he always came awake, fast and complete, his hand already still because a conscious body moved and an unconscious body didn't, and in certain places it had mattered which one you were. He lay still for a moment, listening. The room was quiet. The space heater was running. Outside, the parking lot was empty. Decker was standing at the side of the bed with his head tilted slightly to one side, his ears angled forward, looking not at the door but at Garrison. "What is it?" Garrison said. Decker didn't move. This was not growling, not alerting, not excitement. It was the other thing, the thing Garrison had learned to read in their time together, the posture Decker took when something in the immediate world was not adding up and he was waiting for a human being to arrive at the same conclusion he already had. The dog had an uncomfortable habit of being right about things before Garrison was. Garrison sat up. He looked at Decker. Decker looked back at him. "All right," Garrison said, and got up to dress. He drove the 12 blocks to Olson's Diner at 7:15 before it opened, because he couldn't find a better reason to account for the feeling that had been sitting in his chest since he woke. Decker rode in the passenger seat, which was against the diner's policy, but not against Patty's personal practice, when the parking lot was empty and nobody was watching. Garrison parked out front and sat for a moment looking at the lights inside, at Patty moving behind the counter, at the ordinary morning shape of the place. He thought about the apartment building at the end of Merchant Street. The thought arrived without announcement. He sat with it. 68-year-old Norbert Vane lived in Unit 3 of the Meridian Arms on Merchant Street, a 4-story building with a bad elevator and a worse heating system that the management company had been promising to fix since the previous winter. Norbert was a retired machinist, 3 inches under 6 feet, but still carrying the wide shoulders and heavy forearms of 40 years working metal, with white hair cut close to his scalp and a face that had been good-looking once and had aged into something better, the kind of face that had earned its lines. He had bifocals he wore on a chain around his neck and seldom actually placed on his nose. Garrison had met Norbert 7 weeks earlier, when the older man's grocery bag had split in the parking lot of the Callum Ridge Food Mart, and Garrison had helped gather the rolling cans of soup from under adjacent vehicles. They had spoken for 12 minutes. Norbert had shaken his hand at the end and thanked him by name, even though Garrison hadn't given it. And Garrison had walked to his truck, thinking that was an odd thing to notice about a man, and then not thinking about it again until now. He had seen Norbert at the diner twice in the weeks following. They'd exchanged a few sentences each time, nothing of consequence, the easy talk of two people who have identified each other as roughly the same kind of quiet. What he knew about Norbert Vane was this. The man was at the diner every weekday morning at 7:15 without exception. The waitress, a 23-year-old named Bree who was working her way through an online accounting degree, had mentioned it once with a mixture of amusement and affection. "He orders the same thing every time," she'd said. 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast, no jam. He always leaves a $1.50 tip on a $4 ticket. The last morning Garrison had seen him at the diner had been 8 days ago. He had not been thinking about this consciously. Apparently, Decker had been thinking about it for both of them. Garrison went inside and found Patty unlocking the register. She looked up at him with an expression that said she was glad to see him, and slightly embarrassed to be glad. "Morning," she said. "Norbert come in this week?" The expression on Patty's face shifted. Something careful moved through her eyes. She set the register key down on the counter. "I was going to mention it to someone," she said. "I kept thinking I was being foolish." "When did you last see him?" "Tuesday last week, the usual time." Garrison stood at the counter for a moment. Decker sat at his side and watched Patty with the particular calm attention he gave to people he had decided were not a problem. You have a number for him? Patty shook her head. He never offered, and I never asked. He's not that kind of customer. She paused. He's not that kind of man, I mean. Private. Garrison nodded slowly. Outside the window, the main street of Callum Ridge was beginning to move, the early traffic of a small Montana city waking. A pickup truck, a delivery van, the hardware store owner pulling the gate from his front entrance. I'll check on him, Garrison said. Patty picked up the register key again. She didn't say thank you out loud, but the way she put her shoulders down told him she'd been holding them up for days. The Meridian Arms on Merchant Street was a concrete building from the early 1970s, squat and utilitarian, with a small concrete apron out front where the management had placed 2 plastic chairs and a cigarette stand that nobody used. The elevator was out of service, which Garrison noted with the particular attention he gave to things that had recently changed and shouldn't have. He took the stairs to the 3rd floor, Decker ahead of him, moving at the easy trot that meant he was working but was not alarmed. Garrison knocked on the door of Unit 3. Silence. He knocked again, 3 sharp raps, and waited. After a long moment, he heard movement inside. Slow, careful, the sound of someone negotiating their way across a floor with deliberate caution. Then the metallic sound of a chain being drawn and a bolt turning, and the door opened 8 inches. Norbert stood in the gap. He was wearing a flannel shirt, dark green, untucked, and the same canvas work pants Garrison had last seen him in. He was leaning with one hand against the doorframe in a way that looked practiced, as if he had been doing it long enough to be good at making it look casual. His face was thinner than Garrison remembered, and the hollows under his eyes had deepened, but his gaze was steady. He looked at Garrison. He looked at Decker. Figured somebody might come eventually, he said. Didn't figure it'd be you? Can I come in? Norbert considered this for a moment, then opened the door wider. The apartment was tidy in the way that comes from long habit and not much excess, everything in its place, not because someone had cleaned recently, but because there was never much disorder to begin with. A 2-burner stove, a small kitchen table with 2 chairs, a radio on the counter. A lamp turned low in the corner of the living area. 1 armchair positioned near the window. A prescription bottle on the kitchen table, and beside it, a printed letter that Garrison did not read directly, but registered with peripheral attention the way he registered everything. Norbert moved to the armchair and sat down with the careful deliberateness of a man managing pain he would not name. Decker crossed the apartment without asking permission and settled on the floor beside the armchair, close enough that his shoulder touched Norbert's foot. Norbert looked down at him for a long moment. Good dog, he said finally, and something in his voice was rough at the edges. Garrison took the chair from the kitchen table and sat across from him. He looked at the older man without speaking. Outside the window, the rooftops of Callum Ridge were pale gray in the morning light, and the mountains beyond them were still carrying their winter snow. How bad is it? Garrison said. Norbert was quiet for a moment. He reached down and placed one heavy hand on Decker's back, and Decker was still. Hip replacement, Norbert said. February. Surgery went fine, they said. The week after I got home, I slipped in the shower. He stopped. Tore something they'd just fixed. The surgeon said they could go back in, but the window for that was maybe 2 more weeks. Cost was going to be about $19,000 that my insurance won't cover because of how the fall was classified. Pre-existing complication, they're calling it. Garrison looked at him steadily. I don't have $19,000, Norbert said, without any particular feeling in his voice. I worked 40 years in a machine shop in Great Falls. I have my pension and my Social Security. I have this apartment. I don't have $19,000, and I'm not going to. What did the surgeon say if you don't go back in? He said the joint would calcify as it healed. Some limited mobility, he said, which is what doctors say when they mean you'll have a permanent limp that gets worse in cold weather, and we get about 8 months of cold weather up here. Norbert's hand moved slowly on Decker's back. I'll manage. Garrison looked out the window at the gray rooftops. He said nothing for a moment. When did this happen? The fall was 9 days ago. Been managing the stairs on good days. Today was not a good day. Garrison thought about Decker standing at his bedside in the dark at 6:15 in the morning. He thought about the booth in the corner of Patty's Diner, empty for 8 days, the ring on the laminate, the pale streak on the vinyl. Something in the center of his chest did something he didn't entirely have a name for. Is there anyone? He started. My daughter is in Spokane. She has 2 kids, a mortgage, and a husband working construction. I've called her once and told her I was managing. Norbert looked at him without apology. I'm not calling her again until I have something better to tell her. Garrison stood. He looked around the apartment at the space heater running in the corner, the lamp, the radio, the prescription bottle on the kitchen table. He looked at the letter again without making it obvious he was doing so, and caught a letterhead name in the upper left corner that he stored without looking at directly. Vantage Health Solutions. The address was in Minneapolis. I'll come back this afternoon, Garrison said. You don't have to do that. I know. He took the stairs back down with Decker at his side, his hand on the steel rail, thinking. In the lobby of the Meridian Arms, a man in a clean gray jacket was talking on a phone beside the mailboxes, his posture directed away from the stairs, but his eye line angled back in a way that was not quite casual. He was perhaps 45, clean-shaven, with the kind of practiced stillness that came not from military training, but from sales environments. He finished his call as Garrison reached the bottom of the stairs, clicked the phone into his jacket pocket, and smiled. Help you with something, Garrison said. Just making a call, the man said pleasantly. Beautiful morning. Decker did not growl. He was still. His ears were forward, and his weight had shifted forward onto his front feet, and his eyes were on the man in the gray jacket with the particular locked quality that Garrison had learned over 2 years to distinguish from general alertness. He was not alerting to a threat. He was cataloging one. Garrison held the man's eye for a moment, then walked to the door. Outside on the concrete apron, he stood for a moment and looked back through the glass at the man in the gray jacket who had already turned away and was studying the mailboxes. Something did not fit. He drove back to the motor lodge and sat at the small table by the window with his phone, looking up Vantage Health Solutions of Minneapolis. He found a website that described itself as a patient advocacy and healthcare financing intermediary. He read their listed services, which included insurance negotiation, medical billing review, and healthcare financing solutions for underinsured patients. He read their testimonials, which were effusive in the way of testimonials that have been written rather than collected. He found 4 complaints on a state consumer protection database in Minnesota, 2 in Illinois, and 1 pending matter in Montana's Attorney General office that was not yet resolved. The complaints described a pattern of approaching patients in financial distress following medical complications, offering to negotiate coverage disputes or arrange financing on favorable terms, collecting upfront fees ranging from $800 to $3,000, and then providing minimal or no actual service. He sat with this for a while. Outside his window, the parking lot of the Sunrise Motor Lodge was quiet. An older couple was loading their car at the far end of the lot. A semi-truck moved on the highway beyond the fence. Garrison picked up his phone and called the Callum Ridge County Sheriff's Department. He asked for the duty deputy and was transferred to a woman who identified herself as Deputy Frances Arco. He told her what he knew about Vantage Health Solutions and what he had seen in the lobby of the Meridian Arms. He did not editorialize and he did not exaggerate, because that was the only way these conversations worked. Deputy Arco was quiet for a moment after he finished. "We have had a complaint about that company," she said. "It's been at the state level up until now. Didn't know they were in the area." A pause. "Can I ask your name?" He told her. "You a resident of Callum Ridge, Mr. Holt?" "For now." "All right, I'm going to make some calls. If you see that individual again, don't engage with him. Just call us." "That's what I planned." He put his phone down and looked at Decker, who had been lying at his feet through the conversation, and was now watching him with the patient, interested expression of a dog who had already moved on to whatever came next. "I know," Garrison said. He spent the afternoon in the county clerk's office on the second floor of the old sandstone courthouse, working his way through the property records for the Meridian Arms. The building was owned by a limited liability company called Meridian Property Associates, which traced back through two more corporate layers to a holding company in Phoenix that had purchased it 16 months ago. The previous owner had sold it after the city cited the building for 7 violations, including the heating system. The violations had been addressed in paperwork. The heating system had not been repaired. A city building inspector named Dave Pokorny was in the office when Garrison arrived, dropping off forms, and he stayed for 40 minutes on his lunch break and told Garrison more than Garrison had asked about the Meridian Arms, the company that owned it, and the pattern of deferred maintenance that had been creating problems for the tenants since before he had taken over the inspection district. Pokorny was 51, heavyset, with a short gray beard and the direct manner of a man who had been documenting the same problems for long enough to be angry about it. "They're not illegal," Pokorny said. "They're barely accountable. That's the whole operation." He tapped the counter with one finger. "What they do is buy buildings with existing tenant populations, defer every maintenance item they can legally defer, and wait for the population to turn over. Older tenants, fixed income, they either leave or they don't complain enough to matter. Is the heating violation still open?" "Technically cured. They replaced 2 units in the basement in October. The 3rd floor still has issues, but they submitted paperwork saying the full building was covered, and proving it doesn't cover the 3rd floor requires a full inspection that I've requested 3 times and been delayed on twice." Garrison thought about a 70-year-old man in a flannel shirt managing his apartment stairs on a bad hip in a building that the management company had been promising to fix for over a year. He thought about a man in a gray jacket watching the mailboxes. He went to find Patty. The diner was in the quiet hour between the lunch rush and the afternoon pickup, and Patty was wiping down the counter when he came in and took a stool. She poured him coffee without asking. Decker went under the counter in the practiced way he always did, tail lowered, making himself as unobtrusive as a dog his size could manage. Garrison told her what he'd found. Patty listened with her hands wrapped around the handle of the coffee pot, and her face going through several things in quick succession. He watched her arrive at anger last, which was the correct destination. "He never said a word," she said, not with accusation, but with something closer to grief. 11 months he's been coming in here, and he never asked for anything he didn't order off the menu. He's not the asking kind. "No?" She set the pot down. "What does he need?" Garrison thought about what he knew about Norbert, which was not much, and about what he'd observed, which was more than it looked like. He thought about the prescription bottle on the kitchen table, the careful way Norbert navigated the armchair, the flat, matter-of-fact tone he used for a situation that was costing him everything he had. Right now, he needs to know he doesn't have to navigate this alone, Garrison said. Long term, the financing question is real, and I don't have an answer for that yet. But somebody needs to be present so he doesn't make a bad decision because he thinks he has no other options. Patty looked at him for a moment, then she untied her apron. I'm going to make some calls, she said. There's a woman who runs the senior services office, Rhonda McKee. She's been after me to send her anybody I think needs checking on. I've been telling myself Norbert didn't need it. She hung the apron on the hook beside the pie case. I should have called her in October. You're calling her now? The next 3 days moved in a way that Garrison had not expected and could not have planned, the way things moved sometimes when a small action found its proper direction and gathered what it needed as it went. Rhonda McKee from the Senior Services Office came to the Meridian Arms the following morning with a caseworker from the County Health Department and a copy of the relevant insurance regulations regarding post-surgical complications. She was 58, lean and purposeful, with silver-streaked hair cut short and a manner that suggested she had spent 30 years navigating systems that preferred not to be navigated and had become very good at it. She sat at Norbert's kitchen table for 2 hours and read his policy language with the attention of someone who had been reading policy language long enough to know exactly where the loopholes ran. This classification is wrong, she said finally, and pushed the letter across the table. A fall during a required period of home ambulation following hip surgery is not a pre-existing complication under this policy language. I've seen this argument before. It's an initial denial they use because most people don't appeal it. Norbert looked at her over his bifocals, which were actually on his nose for once. You're saying I can appeal this? I'm saying you should have been told you could appeal it when they sent you this letter. She looked at the letter with the dispassion of someone cataloging a familiar wrong. I'm also saying the appeal window is 31 days from the denial date, and you have 14 days left. Garrison was standing at the window when she said this. He did not turn around. Then we file the appeal today, he said. Rhonda looked at him over her shoulder with an expression that suggested she approved of his brevity. While Rhonda was working at the kitchen table, Garrison went downstairs. Deputy Francis Arco was in the lobby, talking to the building manager. The man in the gray jacket was not present. Arco was 37, with close-cropped dark hair and the comfortable authority of someone who had been working in a community long enough to know most of the people in it and be known back. She had been at the building for 40 minutes when Garrison arrived, which told him she was taking this seriously. She spoke with Garrison in the concrete apron outside, while Decker sat at his side, and the Montana morning held its cold around them. We know who this company is, she said. Vantage Health Solutions. They've been working a circuit through this region for about 8 months. They identify patients through public hospital discharge records in states where those are accessible, or sometimes through employee contacts inside billing offices. They approach people in financial distress, collect what they call assessment fees, and provide essentially nothing. The man in the lobby yesterday. Probably their advance contact. We've seen that pattern before. They like to make initial contact in common areas before going to the door, so it looks social rather than solicitous. She looked at the building. We can't arrest him for standing in a lobby, but we've flagged the Montana case to the state AG's office, and we're asking them to expedite, given that there appears to be active solicitation happening now. What about Norbert specifically? Did they collect any money from him? He said they hadn't approached him directly yet. The man in the lobby was probably still in the identification phase. Arco nodded slowly. Then right now, the best thing is exactly what's happening upstairs. Get the legitimate services engaged, get the insurance appeal filed, and make sure he has people around him who aren't going to let someone talk him into a fee. She looked at Garrison. You living in Callum Ridge? For now, he said. She gave him a look that was not quite a smile. You keep saying that. Garrison said nothing. The insurance appeal went in that afternoon, prepared by Rhonda, and co-signed by Norbert's original surgeon, who Rhonda had reached by phone, and who had, it turned out, been frustrated by the denial and was glad to have a specific clinical statement to provide. The appeal letter was 9 pages. Garrison read all 9 pages at Norbert's kitchen table, while Norbert made 2 cups of coffee on the 2-burner stove. You don't have to read all of it, Norbert said. I know. It's a lot of technical language. I've read worse. Garrison turned a page. Field manuals for mine-resistant vehicle maintenance are about 800 pages and significantly less interesting. Norbert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, How long were you in? 16 years. Where? Mostly the Middle East. 1 rotation in Africa, 2 in the Pacific. Norbert handed him one of the coffees and sat back in the armchair. Decker was at his feet, as though he had always been there. I did 2 years in Korea, Norbert said. Early 70s. Nothing like what you saw, I'd think. Service is service. Norbert looked at him for a moment. You believe that? Garrison thought about it honestly. Yes, he said. Norbert nodded once, as if something had been confirmed that he had suspected, but not been certain of. Outside the window, the afternoon light was laying itself flat across the Montana plains. The particular February light that was more white than gold, carrying no warmth, but covering everything in a temporary kind of clarity. The mountains to the west were sharp in it. 3 days after the appeal was filed, Rhonda called Garrison at 7 in the morning. The insurance company wants to schedule a clinical review, she said. That's not a denial. When they want to deny, they just deny. A clinical review means someone there read the appeal and thinks there might be something to it. Garrison sat at his small table at the motor lodge, the space heater running, Decker's head on his knee. Timeline? He said. 10 days to 3 weeks for the review, then a determination. We won't know until we know. She paused. It also means he's going to need to hold on for at least that long before making any other decisions. He will. You sound certain. I've been checking on him. There was a pause on the line. I know, Rhonda said. He told me. He said you and your dog come by in the morning and stay for coffee. Another pause. He also said you don't talk much? He doesn't seem to mind. He doesn't, she said. Men who've spent a lot of their life around loud things appreciate quiet. She was quiet for a moment herself. So do I, for what it's worth. The man in the gray jacket came back on a Thursday. Garrison saw his car in the Meridian Arms parking lot when he arrived for the morning visit, a dark blue sedan with Minnesota plates parked at the far end, slightly crooked as if the driver had pulled in quickly. He noted the plate number without appearing to do so and sent it to Deputy Arco before he went inside. The man was in the 3rd-floor hallway, 2 doors from Norbert's apartment, speaking with an elderly woman in a housecoat who was leaning against her doorframe with a confused and slightly flattered expression, the look of someone who is not accustomed to being paid attention to by someone in an expensive jacket. Garrison stopped at the end of the hallway. Decker stopped beside him. The man in the gray jacket, whose name Garrison would later learn was Brendan Sorrell, looked at Garrison. He looked at Decker. He said goodbye to the woman in the housecoat with a warmth that did not reach his eyes and walked toward the stairs. He passed Garrison in the narrow hallway at a distance of approximately 3 feet. He did not speak. Decker's posture was fully attentive, but still, the controlled focus of a dog who has made a complete assessment and is waiting on the human's decision. Garrison stepped aside to let Sorrell pass. He knocked on the elderly woman's door. Her name was Vera Pittman. She was 74 years old, with white hair set in careful waves and the gentle, distracted manner of someone who had been friendly her whole life and had not revised that policy in the face of evidence that it was sometimes exploited. She told Garrison that the young man had been explaining some kind of insurance program that might help with her prescription costs, and had asked her to fill out a form with her Medicare number and her current physician's name. And did that seem all right? Did you give him the form? Garrison asked. Vera looked slightly uncomfortable. He said he'd come back for it. Don't give it to him, Garrison said. I'd like to have Rhonda call you this afternoon, if that's all right. She works for the county. She can look at whatever you've already signed, if anything, and make sure you're protected. Vera looked at him with an expression that was half relief and half embarrassment. I should have known better, she said. There's no should in this, Garrison said. These people are practiced at what they do. He went to Norbert's apartment and told him about the hallway. Norbert listened, with his hands folded on the arms of the armchair, his face composed. Vera's a good woman, he said. Her husband passed 3 years ago. She's alone up here. I know. You should tell Francis. Already did. Norbert was quiet for a moment. He looked out the window at the white Montana morning. You've been at this for a while now, he said. Looking out for me? Looking out for Vera now. You've got your own things, I think. Garrison considered this. He thought about the empty morning at the motor lodge, the quiet room, the highway beyond the fence. He thought about the 11 months of mornings at the diner, the booth in the corner, the comfortable rhythm of a small life in a place he had not chosen and had not left. He thought about Decker at the side of his bed in the dark, not alerting but waiting, patient and certain, already a step ahead of everything Garrison had not yet admitted he was paying attention to. I'm around, Garrison said. Rhonda called Vera Pittman. She also, as it turned out, called 2 other Meridian Arms residents she had become aware of through the county's senior wellness program, both of whom had been approached by Sorrell or a colleague at a different address the previous week. She documented everything and sent it to Deputy Arco, who sent it to the State Attorney General's office in Helena, along with the plate number Garrison had forwarded and 3 hours of lobby security camera footage that Arco had obtained through the building manager after a conversation that the building manager later described as very clear and very direct. Brendan Sorrell was not arrested. He was identified, interviewed, and had his activities in Callum Ridge documented in a formal AG complaint that was added to the existing Montana case file. He left the area within 4 days of the interview. Garrison learned this from Arco, who called him on a Tuesday afternoon while he was sitting in Norbert's armchair, which he had ended up in while Norbert was in the kitchen making soup. He's gone, Arco said. The company? Still out there somewhere. These things don't end with one person leaving town. But the state has a much stronger file now, and they're coordinating with Minnesota and Illinois. She paused. You made a difference here, Mr. Holt. Garrison looked across the apartment at the kitchen, where Norbert was standing at the stove with the posture of a man who was still managing pain, but was managing it in his own kitchen, in his own light, without anyone's help except the person currently sitting in his armchair, having a phone call. A few people made a difference, Garrison said. The insurance determination came on a Wednesday, 26 days after the appeal was filed. It was a reversal. Vantage Health, the insurer, would cover the corrective procedure. The determination letter cited the clinical statement from the original surgeon and characterized the original denial as an administrative error in classification. Norbert read the letter at his kitchen table with Garrison and Rhonda, both present, and Decker on the floor between them. He read it twice, then he put it face down on the table and folded his hands on top of it, and was quiet for a moment that stretched out long enough that Garrison began to monitor it. "Well," Norbert said finally, "the surgery can be scheduled within the next 30 days, Rhonda said. "The same surgeon is available. Given the time elapsed, he'll want to do a fresh assessment first, which is standard." Norbert nodded slowly. His hands were still on the letter. "I didn't think it was going to go this way," he said quietly. "I know," Rhonda said. Norbert looked at Garrison. It was a plain look, direct, the look of a man with bifocals he was wearing correctly for once. "I should have gone to the diner," he said. "You should have," Garrison agreed. Something passed across Norbert's face that was close to a smile and closer to something else. "It would have gotten complicated eventually," Norbert said. "Me sitting there every morning, the leg getting worse. Couldn't have hidden it forever." "No," Garrison said. "You couldn't have." A long pause. "Your dog knew before you did," Norbert said. Garrison looked at Decker, who had placed his chin on the edge of Norbert's knee at some point in the conversation, without anyone noting exactly when. "He usually does," Garrison said. The surgery was scheduled for a Friday morning in early April at the Regional Medical Center in Kalispell, 60 miles north. Garrison drove Norbert up the night before and stayed at a budget motel near the hospital while Norbert was admitted for pre-surgical preparation. Decker slept across the foot of the motel bed with the patient certainty of a dog who understood that waiting was part of the work. Patty Olson called twice that evening, and once the next morning. Dave Pokorny sent a text that read, in its entirety, "Good luck. Tell him not to fall in the shower this time." Rhonda had sent a card to Norbert's apartment that arrived before they left for Kalispell, which Norbert had held for a moment before placing it in his jacket pocket, and which Garrison had seen him take out twice on the drive north. The surgery went smoothly. The surgeon was a measured, careful man named Dr. Elias Brandt, who spoke to Garrison in the waiting room afterward with the economy of someone who valued clarity over reassurance. "The joint was compromised but salvageable," Brandt said. "He'll need 8 weeks of structured recovery and then several months of physical therapy, but the expected outcome is restored function. He should be walking normally by late summer." "Thank you," Garrison said. "He told me a friend made sure he got here," Brandt said. "I wouldn't have known that from his behavior. He's not the kind of patient who volunteers that he got help." "No," Garrison said. "He isn't." Norbert was discharged after 3 days. Garrison drove him back to Callum Ridge on a Sunday afternoon, the mountains sharp and white against the sky that had turned the pale blue of mid-spring, the first real warmth beginning to find the road. Norbert said little on the drive, which was normal, but the quality of his silence was different from the silence of the previous weeks. It was not the closed silence of a man managing something alone. It was more like the silence of someone who has put something down that they had been carrying for a long time and is not yet sure what it feels like to have empty hands. When Garrison pulled up to the Meridian Arms, he sat for a moment with the engine running. "I called the building management about the third-floor heat," Norbert said. "Pokorny told me. Also filed the formal complaint with the city that he said he needed to do the full inspection." "I know." Norbert looked at him. "How do you know?" "He told me." Norbert was quiet for a moment. He called me to let me know the inspection was being scheduled. He didn't have to do that. No, he didn't. Another silence. Outside, the Sunday afternoon on Merchant Street was quiet, a few cars moving, the light long and early spring thin. I'm going to be here a while, Norbert said. Recovery, physical therapy, the works. I know. It would be good, Norbert said, with the careful tone of a man who's decided to say something and is committing to it. If you came by in the mornings, during the recovery, I can't promise I'll be great company. You're never great company, Garrison said. Neither am I. Norbert made a sound that was close to a laugh. It was brief and quiet, but it was real. Patty will want to do something, he said. When I'm back on my feet, she's that kind of person. I know, Garrison said. You going to still be here when that happens? Garrison sat with the question for a moment. He looked at Decker in the passenger seat, who looked back at him with the equanimity of a dog who had already settled this question and was waiting for the human to catch up. He thought about the booth in the corner of the diner with the ring on the laminate. He thought about 11 months of mornings at a table by the window, watching the main street of Callum Ridge wake up. He thought about Deputy Arco saying, "You keep saying that," when he said, "for now," and about Rhonda on the phone saying, "Men who've spent a lot of their life around loud things appreciate quiet." He thought about a cold Wednesday morning in early February, a dog standing at the side of his bed in the dark, patient and certain, already one step ahead. I'm not going anywhere, Garrison said. Norbert opened his door and got carefully out of the truck, and Garrison watched him walk to the entrance of the Meridian Arms with measured steps, using the railing, but straight. Garrison sat in the truck for a moment after Norbert went inside. The Sunday afternoon held its light around him, pale and clean and almost warm. Decker put his head on Garrison's shoulder from the passenger seat, which he did not usually do, which was why Garrison noticed it. He put one hand on the dog's neck and sat that way for a minute. Then he drove back to the motor lodge, packed his 2 bags, called the front desk, and paid through the end of the month. He asked the desk clerk about the room rates for a longer stay. The clerk, a young woman who had been working there since the previous fall and had grown quietly accustomed to the sight of a veteran and a German shepherd coming and going, looked at her screen for a moment and told him what the weekly rate was for a long-term tenant. Garrison did the math. It was manageable. I'll take it through summer, he said. We'll see after that. There are people in every town who have been carrying things quietly for so long that they have forgotten anyone else might notice. They show up the same time every morning. They order the same thing. They tip what they can, and they do not ask. And they hold on alone through things that would flatten most people. Because asking for help feels like admitting that the weight is real, and admitting that feels, somehow, like losing. What no one tells you is that help doesn't always wait to be asked for. Sometimes it comes in the form of a dog standing at the foot of your bed in the dark before the sun is up, certain about something you haven't let yourself admit yet. And sometimes it comes in the form of a phone call, made by a woman who almost talked herself out of it. And sometimes it comes from the county, and the inspector's office, and the deputy's desk, and a caseworker's reading of 9 pages of insurance policy language at a kitchen table. Most of the time, though, it comes because somebody who could have looked away chose not to. If someone in your life has been carrying something quietly, and you've been almost certain of it, and almost said something and then almost decided it wasn't your place, this is the story I'd ask you to carry with you. Not the part about the Marine, though that part matters. The part about the booth in the corner, the ring on the laminate, the way absence, when you know someone, sounds exactly like something you were supposed to hear. May you hear it. May you call. May God bless you and protect the people you carry in your heart, and bring rest to those who have been standing too long on their own.